Hello and welcome back to the theatre. We're going to kick off this session with a panel which brings together senior representatives from the main transport modes of rail, road, aviation and maritime. They'll be outlining what integrated transport means for them, but we're also going to unpick the potential benefits from being better joined up, which is indeed the essence of interchange. Now, everybody's already in place, so please give a warm welcome to Gareth Powell, who's Managing Director of Stansted Airport, Adam Simmons, who's Director, Strategic Planning and Analysis at National Highways, Beth West, who is Chief Executive of East West Rail, and Richard Bannatyne, who's Chief Executive of the British Ports Association. Welcome. Now, don't forget, we would love to get your questions as well to this panel, so do use the hashtag interchange so you can get those questions right to us. Right, okay, first up is Gareth Powell. Gareth, the floor is yours. Or in fact, you're going to stay seated, why don't you?
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Great. So, morning everyone, and my name's Gareth Powell, as I said, and I'm the Managing Director at London Stansted Airport. Joined there in September last year, after 19 years at Transport for London, and it's good to see many colleagues from Transport for London around. It's also great to be part of a conference talking about all of the modes of transport, and I don't know how many of you are transport planners in the room. I've been at many public transport and active travel focused conferences where airports are the destination, just like a shopping centre might be a destination or a football event, and actually to talk about the overall join-up of passenger and freight journeys and the productivity it gives is a real opportunity for all of us. Stansted Airport is the fastest recovering major airport post-COVID in the UK. It will carry about 28 million passengers in the year ahead, which makes it the third busiest in the UK. And uniquely amongst airports, particularly around London, it has capacity to grow and permission to grow from that 28 million passenger journeys a year all the way up to 43 million passenger journeys. And we're very proud of the fact that pre-COVID, Stansted had the largest modal share for public transport for onward journeys of any major UK airport. And of course, when we talk about growing the airport, one of the challenges is to grow it in such a way that it remains integrated with public transport, and that mode share proportion, which is over half of the onward journeys, continues to be made by public transport to relieve the pressure that we have on the road network. It's a challenge because there are many different organisations involved, Greater Anglia on the railways, National Express from coach provision, local bus services, and so on. It's also a challenge because Stansted Airport is the largest single site employer in the east of England. So not only are we coping with huge flows of passengers getting on aircraft to go places or arriving in the UK, but we're also dealing with a workforce on site of over 12,500 people, all of whom have their own transport requirements, and that requires quite a lot of work locally with bus services and integration in that. And then finally, if that wasn't enough, Stansted is a major freight airport, handling about 13% of about 240,000 tonnes of freight a year. So it's an important challenge to make sure the freight arrives, but also that then has to get onto the road network for those just-in-time deliveries that you're all relying on when you click on your next day delivery app. So how do we go about doing that? And I think this is part of the theme that I'm sure will emerge from many discussions, and that is about partnership and local discussion. We've had for many years now a local transport forum at Stansted with all of the local authorities, operators and so on, and the aim of that is to better plan and better integrate local transport. It's funded by a levy that we provide from people paying for car parking at the airport, and we use that to pump prime local bus routes, make sure that they can go into establishment and then come on from there. So one of the challenges that we all have, I think, as infrastructure owners or providers, is to make sure we can play our role to join up all of the different people that expect to be involved in any local decision making. I think the other challenge that I would observe is that for customers of ticketing. I know a lot has been done, and a lot was done at TfL while I was there and will continue to be, to join up ticketing between public transport modes and more latterly with others. But we really don't have very good integration at all with aviation. And indeed for Stansted, we don't even have yet, although we're working very closely with the Department for Transport, contactless ticketing extending out to the airport. And uniquely, amongst major airports, Stansted is actually 50% people who live outside of the UK using the airport, and 50% people who live inside the UK. So we're a major gateway for tourism into London and the southeast. And if you arrive off a plane, of course, your first experience of what the UK has to offer is defined by the stress points of trying to get the right ticket to go to the right place at the right time. And there is so much more that we can do beyond that to join that experience up and to make sure that we can provide those integrated solutions. You can buy your ticket commercially through Ryanair onto a bus, but you can't do it for rail. And it just shows that example of how far we've got to go. It's also a challenge to plan operations, and I think many of you will know that there's a conflict always between modes of transport. I know from my TfL days the best time to upgrade a railway is during the bank holiday. Well, in the August bank holiday last year, the whole of the Anglia West Main Line was shut, and that just happens to be the busiest weekend for the airport with all of those arriving passengers and departing passengers. So we have challenges to better integrate even when we get our work done. So finally from me, just maybe to promote some questions and conversations, what about the future? So firstly, the big elephant in aviation's room is, of course, net zero and sustainability. We heard a lot about it in the first session. The route through to net zero is almost certainly delivered by sustainable aviation fuel, which was mentioned earlier. We need much more help as an industry from government and others to get production up to a scalable volume that means that we can do that. As an airport, our own footprint is much easier to decarbonise, and in fact we will do so over the next few years, including a large solar farm to generate all the electric needs of the airport and to charge up cars. But I think we have to address this net zero challenge, as was said earlier, actively everywhere, and aviation is a very hard thing to do it with. I think secondly, technology's got a lot to play, particularly in the customer journey, combined platforms for integrated ticketing and so on, which I know is the subject of many of the breakout areas. And then finally, in planning. And I think infrastructure development, all of us engaged in infrastructure development know that the hardest thing to do is to plan in an integrated way, not only for the infrastructure, but also then for the subsequent operation of that. Because ultimately, it's the customer experience of using that infrastructure that enables economic growth, that enables community growth, and gives us those social outcomes that we're all here to deliver. Thank you very much.
Gareth, thank you very much. Let's move on now to Adam. Adam, the floor's yours.
Thank you, Nicola. Good morning, everyone. Adam Simmons from National Highways. We're the government company that manages England's motorways and major A roads. And really, since we've been set up in 2015 as a government company, I think we've been on this sort of journey of the things that we're talking about here today. And ultimately, for me, it's about how we provide better services for customers and users of transport. So I really wanted to cover two things briefly in opening. First is really, for me, I think the reason for integration that we're talking about is absolutely for delivering what customers need and demand. And then secondly, I think just some reflections on how we are specific about our roles and how we can work together. So firstly, in terms of customers, within National Highways, of course, we do our customer research just about what those users of our network directly want. And as a headline, they want safe, reliable, well-maintained roads. But we've taken this further and really started to think, particularly in terms of thinking about next investment, as to where and how our network sits and serves the wider infrastructure. So we've done a lot of engagement for our route strategies to think through what are the priorities of local authorities, of commercial businesses. We've thought about then what's existing infrastructure that our network serves, what's new, what is planned coming up. And indeed, we thought about the needs of logistics and moving goods around the country. And that's given us 150 sort of specific recommendations to government of how investment can lead to support levelling up, local growth, development of housing, movement of goods, and so on. We've actually taken this a little bit further and recognising that the logistics and actually the customers of logistics are incredibly important for the whole economy. Now, industries that rely on the strategic road network contribute over 400 billion in gross value added to the economy. And what we want to do is survey thousands of those businesses to really understand how they're using the network, where are they traveling, when are they traveling, and specifically actually how they're accessing major ports and airports, so we can understand those through journeys. That then leads me on to thinking about how we think about our specific roles and relationships. Now first, I think it's really important that all of us as transport operators get our basics right. So for National Highways, how do we operate and maintain our network in a safe and serviceable way? But then I think the next step for us is how we really build on the existing transport relationships that we have. So locally here, we're aware that High Speed 2 is coming. There's a lot of development around Birmingham International for the interchange. We are investing in the M42 to improve those journeys, actually improving journeys for pedestrians as much as for car and lorry drivers. We're also doing some work with Network Rail, or have done some work with Network Rail about multimodal freight and understanding how freight can move from the Solent ports up to the West Midlands. And actually actively we're thinking about how we can support business cases of investment by Network Rail to support that choice for how freight can move. We've talked a lot about, in the opening presentations, about obviously important for the environment. I think it's really important how we think about how we integrate with the natural environment. So we're about to publish our environmental sustainability strategy that thinks about how we support health of communities, improve nature, and of course tackle carbon. And then I think my final sort of reflection on the relationships is there are a lot of new relationships we need to be developing, and I think that's why this sort of forum is a great opportunity. We provide data, but I think it's right that National Highways doesn't provide the apps and how people access data. So how do we make sure we're providing information in the right way for those who do? We need to meet the needs of zero-emission vehicle users. Colleague Liz Garland, sat here at the front, will be speaking later about some excellent work we're doing as a company with government and the power sector to think about how we get better rapid charging facilities for drivers of EVs. And we really need to think about exactly what the right role is for meeting the needs of new tech. So we know there are a lot of potential benefits from autonomous technologies coming in vehicles, and a lot of people will tell us, National Highways, you need to provide 5G on your network. Actually, we've thought about that, and actually I don't think that is the next step. Getting the right packets of data that help autonomous vehicles get through those sort of tricky parts of the network, maybe that junctions or where there might be roadworks, getting accurate and timely information to support that is where we think the right investment is. So I think my reflection is, and my thought to leave you, I actually don't think necessarily the answer lies in a big integrated transport strategy. If it happens, it would be great, but I think actually what we can do is all of us in the room here today has a role to play. And I think there's a need for us to be quite fleet of foot to meet the changing needs of our customers. And I think actually to meet the myriad objectives and outcomes we want to all achieve, I think it involves quite a myriad of attacking the challenge on all fronts. So I think really drawing on the intelligence that we have in this room about what our customers demand and how we can help that, and critically how we work together, for me, is where the answer lies.
Okay, Adam, thank you. And at this point, I would like to encourage you to put your questions through using the hashtag interchange so that you can put them to the panel later. Beth, can I come to you now, please?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Beth West. I'm with East West Railway Company. I was delighted this morning when Sir John was talking about cross-country journeys, and I was getting really G'd up to hear him talk all about East West Rail, but he didn't. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what we are and what we're here to do. So our purpose is to unlock sustainable growth between Oxford and Cambridge. You'll notice none of those words were trains or railways. But I'll first talk about the trains, and I'll talk about what the unlocking means first. So what we're designed to build is first, it is a railway between Oxford and Cambridge. The first phase is currently under construction between Oxford and Bletchley, and when it goes into operation in 2025, it will have services going up to Milton Keynes as well. Then we've got the second and third phases, which will go first from upgrading the Marsden Vale line between Bletchley and Bedford. It will have an upgrade to Bedford Station, and then a new route from Bedford to Cambridge. The government will be announcing what that line of route is going to be next month, so it's great news for us in terms of how we then develop our development consent order process, which is our planning process to get that underway. But really what East West Rail is transformational infrastructure. It's not about just an incremental bit of kit that's going to go on the network. It is about how do we actually facilitate growth in the region between Oxford and Cambridge. There are, at both ends of that line, there are big cost of living crises where we've got potential for growth, but really difficult to get people into those jobs because it's expensive to live, and there isn't that east-west connectivity where housing prices are a bit cheaper and the opportunity for other businesses to develop is a bit cheaper. So what it means for us is that we need to be working not just with other modes of transport, but with our local authority partners as well, to make sure that the opportunities to develop more jobs, more housing across that line of route is factored into everything we're doing in terms of our design. So what that means in real life is that as we're doing the railway as well, it's looking at, well, how do we get people from their door into the stations, and how do we work with our local communities to add those bits of connectivity to our business case to make sure those are really happening. So for us, it's baked into what we're doing, the fact that we have to work really closely and collaboratively with partners across all the transport modes, as well as our local communities, to get to those desired outcomes of unlocking sustainable growth. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And finally, let's come to you, Richard.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Good morning. Great to be here in Birmingham. Probably about the furthest place away from a seaport there is in the UK, but anyway, I'm kind of dealing with it anyway. So, no, it's great to follow the chat. I would say also, please get involved with Slido. I've already taken the opportunity to hammer Gareth about exorbitant costs dropping people off at Stansted Airport, and he's already sold it to me, and I'm now a convert. So I'm very pleased to do that. I look forward to the next time I tap in and drop my wife and family off. Also, interesting to hear the sort of fellow speakers. Now, ports, maritime, slightly different. Gareth mentioned, I think, 28 million international or journeys or passengers moving through Stansted. It's about the same number for the whole of the UK ports industry in terms of our international sailing. So predominantly ferries out of places like Dover, but also a little bit of cruise. But we just don't have that footfall as a collective that the rest of the transport industry has. But what we do have is an abundance of freight and associated sort of heavy products, etc., that needs to be moved. And what we found in the UK, it's probably quite apparent to a lot of people, is that roads is king. And due to the nature of our geography being a relatively small island, we don't have those sort of more cost-effective long rail hauls for freight. That said, there are definitely some opportunities, and we are keen to see how the freight network can service our ports industry much better, and on particular routes. And one thing that is helping is a steady shift to unitised traffic. So unitised is containers and roll-on, roll-off freight particularly. But you can load those kind of things onto rail relatively easily, and talked about multimodal interfaces briefly. That's a great opportunity for our industry, and it's a good opportunity to ease congestion and also to help our sort of environmental impact from the ports industry. If you go, show me age a little bit here, but if you go back to something like Eddington, the review in 2006, I think that was a great moment for the transport industry, and a lot of the lessons are still relevant, so I'd urge anyone who's not familiar with that, dig that out. Policymakers, use it the next time you're having a review, because there's a lot of good things in that we could use and take forward. But that talked about improving connections to ports, and particularly last mile connections. Now, if I go to Tom and think about our road network in England, I think the trunk network is pretty good, actually. I would say our feedback is pretty positive about that. The issues we have in the port sector is actually how we interface and connect to that. And predominantly, that's not really Tom's issue. That's local authorities, those last mile links I was mentioning. Sometimes they're not always dual, sometimes there's pinch points. They're usually going through big urban areas or areas where we could look to ease and improve those flows. Now, so what, you say? So we get a bit of queues around ports, but that's undermining the efficiency of our port sector, and we do compete as an industry and regionally. So let's improve and invest in those transport connections to our ports, because it's not only a benefit to those economic areas around those coastal communities, those regions, it's also beneficial to the people who live and work and commute in those areas. So I think we can't think that by investing in freight routes that we're not helping passenger transport as well. We're always, and the ports industry is a classic one here, we're not owned typically by the public sector. We're independent, we're self-financing, etc. But we are important bits of infrastructure assets. And we do have some asks. We don't directly ask for, or always ask for direct subsidies, but that public infrastructure, those connections, is something that we are looking to government and the public sector to put its money where its mouth is to help us. That's probably enough for me as an opening ramble, but look forward to any questions that we might get on Slido.
And we are getting a lot of questions on Slido, so thank you very much. So that's #interchange for this room. So let's get straight to it. This one's from Ian, who says the ease and cost of travel for the customer to convert to environmentally friendly is the main reasons to switch. What more can we do to reduce costs? Who'd like to take that? Please go ahead.
So it's a great question, and I think we heard from the Minister earlier, there are some sort of things to help that. I'll give you one example from National Highways. A few years ago, I think we recognised that, particularly for small businesses that might be wanting to invest in an electric vehicle van, that the uncertainty perhaps of how that might work for them. Yes, some of the upfront costs, but that sort of risk that maybe further costs may happen if they feel it's not the right decision was a bit of a barrier to people adopting those. So actually we work with government, we supported some funding through local authorities for local businesses to try electric vans. And I think that was a really great way just to sort of help people get over that hump of sort of trialing that. So I think that those sorts of examples we can absolutely do and work with. And I know we've done a lot of work to try and make the charging infrastructure there as well available to people. So one example on that question.
Great. And Richard, do you want to say something?
Just following quickly, I mean, it's a slightly difference with the maritime community is we, unlike perhaps our sort of colleagues here, we do have a lot of our focus is actually international, very international. So ships, for example. So ships coming into ports are regulated globally, so we don't have the powers to regulate, to get them to use cleaner fuels, etc. And then equally, although it's less of an international angle, other visitors to our ports, users, etc., are lorry drivers, for example. And that's not really our responsibility. We can't tell lorry drivers what to do, what vehicles to use, etc. We do support the drives to green up and improve the kind of standards of HGVs, etc. And we're looking at what facilities we provide. But we're stuck in a bit of a difficult place. We've got a few things that we're responsible for, not directly relevant to transport today, but things like plant and machinery, there'll be cranes, etc., and things we use around our terminals. But we're stuck a little bit, I think. We do need to link up with partners in the transport industry so that it's a joint effort. As I say, that international dynamic and ships, etc., is very challenging for us.
Indeed. We have another question here. Could more be made of coastal transport to move freight around the UK to reduce road freight? Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I can cover that. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
So coastal, I can't actually see the question. So I assume is that coastal shipping, or is that, there's kind of two things here. Modal shift has been talked about for many years, of course, and government has various kind of freight grants and other stimulus to try and encourage that, which hasn't quite succeeded. There's been some good examples, etc., of moving sort of heavy things like timber off road networks and onto short sea shipping. But there's definitely, my association has over 450 ports, piers, harbours, jetties in it, which shows there's a huge amount of choice. Now, some of them are very small and modest in sort of fairly kind of rural places, but there's definitely the opportunity to ship freight around our coasts. And we always have good examples of, timber is one, we've a lot of aggregates, a lot of waste, etc., is shipped out of the City of London on the Thames. So there's definitely the facilities there, but I think a lot of the supply chain and the traders and others and buyers, they don't actually know about this as a kind of opportunity or an option. So we do, as an industry, need to do more to promote the opportunities there. The same actually for rail freight. I think there's a huge opportunity there. Now, government is a little bit, there's less players in rail freight, so we can actually probably succeed easier, whereas maritime is a little bit more diverse. But I don't know if you want to follow on.
I was going to just talk on rail freight, because I think one of the big challenges is that there's a lot of investment that's needed across the entirety of the rail network to bring it up so we can get the rail freight aspirations. But to give an example, we were talking about for East West Rail, how do we get freight traffic from Folkestone? And the question is, well, where is it going? Does it actually make more sense to come in from Southampton, for example? And I think we probably need to do better collectively as industry groups to speak with one another rather than just sort of doing what we always do and put our heads down and go, this is my bit of problem, and look at sort of where do we think the future of things are going to go, so that we can put the investment on the rail network in the right places to facilitate the port use.
It is a challenge actually, because the freight industry is of course very much private sector and market led. So we don't have, I mean, unless we have a radical change in government policy where it's sort of hands-on with the sector, we do have to accept that the market is going to decide. But there's more to be done to promote and work with, making the infrastructure right in the first place is a big thing.
Yeah.
Okay, we've had a question on accessibility, which has now disappeared. What are your views on accessibility moving forward?
I can take that. I mean, it's a massive issue, and we have an aging population as well, so we have to be thinking about accessibility in everything that we're doing, because we need to have older people able to be able to get around our networks as well, and we don't want them stuck in their cars, even if we are providing better services for them. So again, when we think about design, if Gareth's talking about the airport expansion, it has to be integral to everything that we're doing, and not just for the aging population, but for neurodiversity and lots of things. And it's becoming a much more common thing that we're doing. We've got an accessibility panel already in our design process to make sure that we're getting those voices into our design. So, it's one of the things that we always have to make sure that we're thinking about at the beginning, rather than sort of bolting it on at the end, which there are many things we tend to do, that we bolt stuff on at the back end and then go, oh, that's going to be really expensive, so we're not going to get it, and we're not going to do it. Whereas if we thought about it at the beginning, we could get a lot more benefit much more easily.
Did anybody want to pick up on that?
Yeah, and it's exactly the same, I think, for other modes of transport. The challenge in an airport often in the past has been to make sure that those that require extra mobility assistance can get on and off the aircraft at the right time, so that the aircraft can depart. The better way of thinking about it, and the essential way of thinking about it now, is to ensure that customer has the same, if not better, experience travelling through an airport as anybody who doesn't require assistance. And that doesn't mean just getting on the aircraft. It means the same retail experience. It means the same check-in and security experience, etc. So I think we've got quite a long distance to travel in some cases to make sure that we really are providing that equality of access. And I know when you integrate between different modes of transport, of course, different providers have different standards. They have different systems in place, different ways of booking your travel, and so on. So, technology will help us there to really break down those last remaining barriers, so that people feel confident in their travel options.
Finally, because we are coming to the end of this panel, what are your views, panel, on government moving to a single transport fund to deliver the correct transport outcomes by mode? Who'd like to take that?
Well, I can make a start. I mean,
Right.
I think, from a personal perspective, I think it is a challenge when government has many different funding streams for different aspects of transport infrastructure. Some of it is really important because it enables smaller scale schemes at local level to access funding and to deliver. The challenge becomes when there are multiple of those, and when you look at the sum of the parts, you can't really be convinced that actually you've made the right overall choice at a regional level, or indeed ultimately at a national level. So it does then rely on either integrated transport authorities, sub-regional authorities, Transport for London, etc., to do the joining up whilst accessing individual government funding streams, or it requires infrastructure providers to get together through relationships and fora and trade associations to try and do the same thing. So personally, I think it would be very helpful to have more join up from an integration funding perspective within government, because at the moment I think it's relying on pretty much every other authority and every other infrastructure provider to do that work for them.
Yes, do.
I can see why the question was asked. I suspect we're never quite going to get to that point. I think what I would say is that so yes, for roads, strategic roads, we have a road investment period. Rail has its control periods. Other projects have specific funding. I do think when we hit things like budgets and spending reviews, funding generally gets agreed at the departmental level, and actually at that point that we do get to have those conversations across the piece about where the relative priorities do fall. And what I would add as well is I think what's baked into a lot of the, perhaps by mode investment processes, is a requirement to look at integration and think how we can support other modes. I gave the example before of how at National Highways, we are supporting business cases by Network Rail to improve rail facilities, because we absolutely see that need to give that option to shift freight potentially from road to rail. So I think there are ways we can work within the system that I realise does sort of perhaps focus on sort of modes by having these sorts of conversations and having that mind to integration.
Thank you. And Richard, I know you want to pick up.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I don't want to kind of get the violins out, but, you know, the kind of maritime community, because we're not publicly funded predominantly, we're not used to receiving that kind of funds, but there are things we need funded, and we're rather at the back of the queue, I would suggest. And I understand that, you know, the old adage that boxes don't vote, but foot passengers do, etc. I think that's kind of illustrative. And I'm sure if I was a minister, etc., I'd be doing exactly the same kind of thing. I think if whatever you do, you're rearranging the deck chairs with sort of funding mechanisms, etc. I think you can't get away from the fact that we don't actually spend that much on transport in comparison to our sort of European colleagues and partners and competitors. And RIS has been a very welcome, you know, RIS, the latest RIS, huge amount of money going into roads. We very much welcome that. But it's probably not still on a level with some of those places like France, etc. And when you assess the last generation, we haven't spent as much as those partners. So it's not just a Conservative coalition or Labour policy. We just don't do it in the UK. And I think we need to get our heads round. We need to fund it more and better.
Okay, all right. But panel, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. I'm so sorry, it's gone so quickly. But I just want to thank everybody here today. Thank you, panel, for your insights. It's been fascinating hearing from you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank the panel. Thank you.